All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Cathedral webinar live on June 10th, 2025. If it's your first time attending one of our webinars, Cathedral means learning in Creek. And today you'll be learning all about all hazard preparedness and partnerships from Dr. William R. Lashford. He is the president of the Native Peacekeeper Consulting Group. My name is Jasmine Raming, and I'm the marketing coordinator here at the Native Learning Center. We're also happy that you could join us today. Please follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The materials discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, and trade secret, and other intellectual properties. Okay. Also displayed here is, before we get started, I want to familiarize you with the learning platform and where things can be found. I have put the links to the PDF for today's slide in the chat. You can also access a copy of the slides as well as today's recording in the future by going to the courses section here on our platform. Any resource items for download are also available within the online course tab when you go through the courses page. Each time you're ready to join one of our webinars moving forward, you just need to log into the website and click the large green banner that will be across the top of the screen, like in this picture. When you first join the webinar, it'll prompt you to complete an audio test before joining. Please select the listen only option so we can avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. If you're needing to change the speaker your sound is playing from, you can select the phone icon down at the bottom of your screen, and it will bring up a list of your speaker and mic devices, so you can choose your preferred audio output. We do encourage your participation during today's webinar, and we will primarily rely on the public chat in the left-hand gray menu panel. You can also open the public chat and the shared notes. If you click the public chat, you will see a chat open between all webinar attendees, the NLC facilitator, and the webinar instructor. Simply click on the box that says Send Message to Public Chat, type the message you want to send, and hit Enter, or click on the blue paper airplane icon to send your message. Please send your comments and any questions you have into the chat, and feel free to use the raise your hand feature in the bottom right corner of the screen. If you think we have missed something along the way, any tech support issues can be submitted here as well, and I will do my best to help navigate it. If you clicked on the shared notes section, you will find some helpful links, like a link for today's webinar, feedback survey, a link to join our weekly email newsletter so you can always know when our webinars and various trainings are happening, a link to the location of the Cathedral webinar archive on our YouTube channel, also a link to connect with us on LinkedIn, and also a link to bookmark for easy login to Cathedral Constant Learning in the future. Let's all get the chat box going together now by letting us know your name, where you're from, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation, if you have one. You may also be a tribal employee, and your work and role in Indian country that may have led you to today's webinar. And one quick final note, when you're introducing yourselves in the chat is to try to avoid clicking on the red menu panel all the way on the left side of your screen. If you click on the red menu panel, it'll take you out of the live webinar. If you do accidentally click this, you can simply rejoin by clicking on the large green banner at the top of the screen. With that, it's my greatest pleasure to introduce you to today's webinar instructor, Will. I'll hand it off to you now.
All right. Thank you, Jasmine. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today during I know your busy days this week on this Tuesday, joining us for the risk management assessment and all hazard preparedness. So we're going to go over a high level of risk assessments today with regards to the emergency management space. So I look forward to just being able to deliver this information to you and any further follow-up information you may have, but definitely want to recognize you. I understand how the days get a hold of you and you end up getting caught up in your everyday assignments and workload, and to take time out of your day. I certainly appreciate you being on this afternoon. As Jasmine said, my name is Will Latchford. I'm a 32-year veteran of the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I started in the early 90s as a frontline police officer. And through my career and that opportunity that the Seminole Tribe gave me, I was able to build my career and end up retiring in 2023 as the Executive Director of Public Safety, overseeing police, fire, and emergency management, and around 500 employees and a high-level budgetary organization. So the Seminole Tribe has provided that opportunity for me to be in front of you today, along with the Native Learning Center, and to partner with them to deliver just lessons learned throughout my career and experiences that we've had, not only in the Seminole Tribe, but also I've had the opportunity over those 32 years to travel around the country and work with other Indian tribes when it comes to disaster preparedness or events that they may have taken on, just to be able to assist. So I'm honored to instruct with you today. As Jasmine indicated, from my education perspective, I'm a doctor of criminology. I have a bachelor's degree in public administration, and my master's degree is in homeland security. So across the board when it comes to public safety, but when it really boils down to how we get to where we need to go from an organizational standpoint, it really starts with leadership. So that's really my biggest fame, is to education is great, but the biggest thing for me is just to be able to lead people and to be able to support and develop individuals to reach their goals. I'm currently the co-director for Florida State University's Native American Crime and Justice Policy Institute. And it's something that is really dear to my heart, to just pass information along, again, just in Indian country and outside Indian country, and just take that knowledge that I was afforded across those 32 years to pass it along. And we can all learn from each other regardless of what our titles are or what our experiences are. And today's an opportunity for me to pass along information to you that may resonate with you, maybe some new information that you learn, and maybe something that kind of jogs your brain a little bit to bring you back to information you already knew, and you may have just forgot throughout the course of time or your course of your day. So emergency management is definitely important, and there's a lot of aspects to it that sometimes can be confusing and sometimes can be overwhelming. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll answer them the best I can, or even follow up at the end. I'll provide my email information. And if you ever have any questions or follow up, feel free. You can email me and touch base. A little bit about Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group. When I retired, we formed an organization that's family owned. It's owned by Amy Osceola Latchford. It's a small business certified woman-owned organization that really the foundation is to ensure Amy's mission, and that her mission is to empower organizations by providing the comprehensive background and sustainability safety solutions that is going to enhance your program, regardless if it's emergency management, law enforcement, fire rescue, or government itself. We work with the education departments for the Bureau of Indian Education. We work with schools and gaming industries, and we want to make sure that her mission is carried out is just to give back, to develop and enhance Indian country service, to provide a higher level service to your community. So some of the programs that we do from our businesses, program developments will help you write policies. We'll review your policies. We'll partnership with you to develop a better community partnership with your community. Really, that's who we all work for, is the community that we serve. And we feel that it's important to have that partnership, and it's always evolving. A partnership is just not a one-off. It's a partnership that we all have to build off of. Employee development, policy development, again, emergency management planning, vulnerability assessments, public safety planning from the overall picture of police, fire, and emergency management, school safety, and just through professional development. We have a learning management system that we provide educational courses through. As we go through today, I would just like to pass along to you, there shouldn't be any issues, but if there is a conflict where you hear me say something or recommend something to you that may conflict with your policy is important to me and to our organization to make sure you follow your policy and you give your organization the opportunity and respect to the policies that they have in place. So if there is that contradiction of information that I provide to you today, we recommend you go back, sit with your supervisor, and the policy you have may work for you. And that's what you want. You want a policy that works for you. You don't necessarily need a policy that works for one tribe or another tribe. You want one that's going to be strong and be in strength for your community. So if you do hear that contradiction, please refer back to your organizational policies and adhere to your policies, because that's really determines the success of your organization. And if you do find that your policy is maybe not up to standard or has to change, the good part about it is you can bring it to your supervisor's attention and you can work together to get that policy updated. So let's talk a little bit about risk assessments and all hazard preparedness. So I do recognize around the country, everybody does something a little bit different that works for their community, and that's really the way it should be. We shouldn't all just do everything the same, because what works in one community may not necessarily work in another community. So you want to make sure that you control your destiny for your community, for the success of your community. So I recognize that a lot of tribes leave the emergency management piece to their emergency management individuals and programs. And I'm a big believer in that. However, I also believe that programs throughout the tribe also have to have a component that addresses the emergency management concepts. You don't have to be an emergency management expert, but you have to be an expert in delivering service to make sure that your program is at the highest level to be successful for the community that you serve. So when we look at the risk assessments in all hazard preparedness plans from housing, you should have a separate plan from a risk assessment standpoint, and don't rely on just your emergency management to take care of this for you. It's something that really is your holy grail that can help you through any critical event, and really not just help you as a program, but it can help your community fight through that resiliency to get to the other side and get back to some normalcy. So when we look at risk assessments today, we'll go through some different areas that I feel you can gain and you can learn from. I'm not a big person when it comes to acronyms. You're going to see I do use acronyms in this PowerPoint. However, I also believe that plain talk is the best way to go, and sometimes the acronyms are so overwhelming that we can't keep track. And I know for me personally, sometimes those acronyms drive me crazy because there's so many of them and you keep track of them. I'd rather just use the words. So you'll see them in the presentation today, because I know some people do live in the acronym world, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you do what works for you and your environment. The whole goal today is to ensure that from a housing standpoint, that you are at your highest level of preparedness to take care of the community that you serve. So as we go through the webinar, we're going to talk about, again, risk assessments. We're going to define and put into context what that means in emergency management world. We're going to talk about the THIRA framework, right? The threat and hazards when it comes to mitigating your community. We're going to look at the overall vulnerability assessments and the mitigation strategies that you can look at to help develop from a housing program. And then at the end, if you have any questions and we have some time, we'll visit some questions in the chat. Some of the learning objectives for this webinar: we want you to understand the all hazards approach. You're not alone in this. From a housing standpoint, I recognize the fact that you're the subject matter expert in your field, but just also understand that in order for your community to be successful, you have to do it together. You have to work with the police, the fire departments, the emergency management departments. You have to work with your finance individuals, your logistics and purchasing people. You have to work with your political officials. So you're not in this alone. So as we go through today, some of the learning objectives is to recognize that across those categories of programs, this framework is not just for you, it's for everybody. We want to look at mastering the threat and hazard identification and risk assessment program. That's the THIRA, or also known as the stakeholder preparedness review methodology in context. So we'll put that a little bit in context. We'll talk about kind of that process that you can use, and we'll keep it simple to where it's not overwhelming, because emergency management, there's so much that goes around it, because you're really trying to keep your community safe, and you always want to be at the highest level of your game. And in order to do that, sometimes our emotions and our want to get everything right overtakes us, so it becomes stressful in the profession. So we want to make sure we talk a little bit about that process today. We want to utilize some assessment tools. We're going to look at some tools that you can use when it comes to identifying threats that may impact your community. And also, we're going to look at developing some mitigation strategies. We'll talk a little bit about how effective they can be to help you from a housing program standpoint. Let's talk a little bit about what is all hazard preparedness. It's basically very simple. It comes down to a comprehensive approach. And the best way to do this is just to visualize what can go wrong, right? So when we look at a risk assessment, we just want to visualize, if we take our community and we look at our community as an overall picture, and then we apply the hazard to it. We apply either a hurricane, a wildfire, a tornado, a terrorist event, a cyber event. We want to look at how do we visualize that when it comes to a risk assessment. So the methodology that's considered is we want to look at a full spectrum of the potential threat and hazards that we could be upon. So as I talk today, I'd ask you to visualize and kind of just think about those threats that are out there in your community. And you'll hear me go through that statement a couple times throughout this presentation, because sometimes I feel that we need to just sit back, kind of let the crisis go down a little bit, and sit back in solidarity and just think about things that we may be able to do to help mitigate a crisis, right? No one likes to look at the bad. No one wants to look at what's going to go wrong. But as leaders and as programs, we have to look at what's going to go wrong, or what are those potentials that's going to go wrong, or what we're going to be impacted with that is going to have a negative effect on the people we serve, right? So we want to focus on solutions and really to be effective, right? We want to focus on building those core capabilities that can be applied to the community that can make us successful, right? We're successful when things aren't going on, right? A good leader is very good when nothing's happening in the program, nothing's happening in the environment. A really true good leader is really identified when something happens and how they respond as a leadership standpoint. So same thing when it comes to risk assessments. You know, we can sit down and have a risk assessment. We can develop the best risk assessment that's out there. But the reality is, until that risk assessment is applied, we don't know how good that risk assessment is going to be. So in order to do that, we want to make sure we can visualize, we can kind of play through scenarios, the what if game. If this happens, what are we supposed to do? We want to look at those what ifs and then develop potential solutions that we can use to get to that response. Again, we want to enable the organization to scale your response to be appropriate based on the specific characteristics that are hitting your community, right? It's all about rebuilding your community to make sure everybody's safe and they can get back to some sort of normalcy after that event takes place. So we want to make sure that we're flexible. We want to make sure we create an environment that we can adapt to different directions when something comes in front of us, because you're not going to develop a risk assessment that covers everything. That's really unrealistic to think that somebody can create a risk assessment that covers everything in your community. What this promotes and this training promotes is to develop a framework that you can use and you can apply to basically every scenario. It's not going to be a perfect square peg, square hole, but you can apply the framework and you can maneuver the framework around to assist you in developing solutions to deal with the crisis that you're going through in your community. So we want to look at the all hazards categories, right? So I've narrowed this down into just a simple framework, and you can look at really what housing should look at when they look at their risk assessments, right? You have natural hazards, which, you know, we all deal with: floods, wildfires, earthquakes, tornadoes. That's severe weather event, disease outbreaks, or even drought conditions, right? So if you look at when you develop your risk assessments, you can take these three categories, from natural hazards to the technology hazards to the human caused hazards. If you take these three hazards and you keep them compartmentalized within these titles, it's going to help you kind of paint an easier picture to deal with some of the issues, right? From a technology standpoint, hazard, you have the infrastructure failures. You have hazardous materials that could impact your housing community, transportation issues that you may be dealing with, and of course the utilities disruptions, right? If the water is impacted, you know, from the standpoint it's contaminated, how do you deal with those issues, right? That's a risk, to make sure that your water is always at the most level that it doesn't have any negative potency that's going to have a negative impact on your community, right? So you want to make sure that you're looking at the technology hazards. One of the issues that we all can relate to, technology has grown so much to our advantage, but there also is some disadvantages to it. You know, some of us are old enough to where you used to carry a little black book around. You had everybody's phone number in the black book, so that was really your holy grail that you could go to get a phone number. Now, if you ask people, regardless of their age, if you have a cell phone and you ask them to repeat phone numbers that they had, or of a friend or a coworker, they'd have a hard time repeating what that phone number is. They'd have to go into the phone to look for it. Well, the reality is, if that phone loses its technology, we're going to have a hard time communicating with each other, because we don't have that little black book that we used to have, right? So one of the simple ways that you could do that is make sure you have your contact list in your phone in an Excel spreadsheet that you have, and you can easily access that, right? That's as simple as risk assessment goes. Phone doesn't work, can't get to my contacts, but I have to call people, or I need a phone number, you know, to call somebody. Then I can go to this Excel spreadsheet and I can get that information to make that call or touch base with that person. So, you know, that's really a simple analogy that we can look for when it comes to risk assessments, when it comes to technology hazards. When we look at human caused hazards, we're all familiar with terrorism. You know, that's something in a new way of life that since 9/11 or a little bit before we've had to live with, and that's not going to go away. So that's just a new practice, and Indian country is not exempt of that. We're not exempt of dealing with terrorism issues or civil disturbances. We may not have it as impactful, you know, as frequent as other areas around the country, but it does impact Indian country, right? So intentional acts of violence that occurs on tribal lands, and then you have cyber attacks. You know, we're going through webinars right now. We're using the internet to do that. We're fortunate enough to do that. But what happens if the internet goes down? How do we deal with that? How do we communicate with paying our employees, you know, when we have an infection in our software because our software was breached and all the material from personal information was breached and now it's being used somewhere? How do we deal with that? And from a housing standpoint, you keep information from individuals that, regardless if it's credit card information or just information that's confidential and sacred to people, you keep that within your housing software or that platform you use. So those are areas that you want to look at when you look at hazard categories. And if you keep these three categories separate and you just list those areas, and there may be areas under these criteria that you use or you're affected by in your community, just add it to that specific category. These are the three main areas that you can utilize to help create your framework. When we look at why we should be doing risk assessments, it's very important that we look at from a strategic resource allocation. We don't have all the resources at our fingertips. We have to work with others. We have to share those resources. So we want to enable your organization to look at what direct resources you have, what limited resources you have, and then how can you maximize to make sure you're prepared. We want to be able to use risk assessments to allow us to be in a position to have informed decision making. We want to make sure all the facts are in front of us before we make a decision that's going to impact someone's life or get them back on track within a community, right? So we want to make sure that we have all that data and it's in our leadership's hands so we can make that critical decision. We want to make sure we're in compliance for regulatory compliance issues, right? There's a lot of rules that go with grant funding. There's a lot of rules that go with accreditation and just government regulations, regardless if it's tribal government regulations or federal government regulations. We want to make sure that we do risk assessments so we can look at all those areas so we can be compliant. And the biggest thing is to make sure to build your community up through resiliency, right? A lot of times in a rental community, your renters are relying on you, right? They feel they rent it from you and you're responsible for everything. They're responsible for nothing, right? Until they want something, then they kind of take that ownership. Our job is to make sure that they're always a partner with us so they can always be resilient and they can be part of that resiliency when we build that framework out when it comes to the risk assessments, right? So we want to make sure they're always engaged in the entire process. And that's just through good communication, getting their buy-in, getting their opinion, and giving them that opportunity to have a say. And if they have a say, then they take that ownership in the world of that crisis. So if they have that ownership, you're going to have a little bit easier time getting them to buy into some of the changes or some of those decisions that you have to make. You want to make them part of the team. And I know sometimes that's challenging because you're either part of the team or you're not part of the team. And some people only want to be part of the team when it's convenient for them. But it's our job as a program to try and mitigate those issues and bring them close to that environment or close to the team as we can so they're part of the team all the time, not just when that crisis takes place. When we look at some of the areas, this is an inadequate case study that I experienced over my career. You know, there was a situation where an urban housing authority focused primarily on fire safety, right? The housing authority was so focused on fire safety and they were allocating all their resources to ensure that the fire detection and the suppressant systems within the buildings were up to date. What they didn't expect and they didn't focus on through that aspect, although that's important looking at the resources for fire detection, they didn't recognize the fact that the building was in such an area where if there was a major storm that came through or a pipe broke, that there'd be flooding. Well, hence they had a major flooding issue that was an unprecedented rainfall that came through and it hit the first floor of the building, right? The storm overwhelmed the drainage system within the environment, and multiple housing units on the bottom floor had to be evacuated, and they couldn't be in there anymore. Well, nobody had the evacuation plan that lived in the housing authority, which put about 250 residents displaced. They were displaced for weeks at a time. You know, that's the consequences, right? When we don't plan ahead and we don't look at what could happen and how we're going to deal with it. Here you have 250 residents that were displaced and their damaged homes were impacted. All their belongings were destroyed, you know, and it put a lot of individuals who had medical issues in a whole nother layer or level when it comes to dealing with those medical issues. Some of it put them in a position where their medical condition became worse because of that stress. And if the organization would have had a plan, then it could have mitigated some of those issues where the residents had buy-in, there was more cooperation, that stress level wouldn't have been raised to the level where they made themselves sicker, right? So the lesson learned here is you want to make sure you have a comprehensive all hazard plan, right? that could identify certain areas. And in this case, you want to identify through that process, they identified that flood vulnerability was something that they didn't look at. They focused so much to make sure the building was fire protected, which is needed, but they failed to balance out what was priority for them. So we want to make sure we don't get into a tunnel vision aspect. And it's very easy to, right? It's very easy because you may be short in some areas, right? In this particular case, the building was old, so they were bringing the fire inspections up to date. All the fire apparatuses around the building, they needed to make sure were working. And through that process, they lost sight of really what that balance that they needed. And they took it to the extreme where everything became about fire safety preparedness. And they forgot about, well, if there's a bad rainstorm that comes in, how's that going to be negatively impacted? The building was secure. However, the flooding was because the drainage that was outside in the roads and down the street where it all caught up and the building was impacted. So we want to make sure that we don't get tunnel vision when we create these risk assessments. So that's very important. You want to find the balance. You want to find a balance that could help you prepare, but knowing that you're not going to find 100% issues that you're preparing for. Don't overwhelm yourself thinking that you're going to get 100% of every event that takes place. However, you want to find that balance to ensure that you're maximizing your effort to identify those realistic areas that can negatively impact your community. Now, when we look at your top threats, I put this in here just from the standpoint of just to get you thinking that in the areas that you're in around the country, the reservations you're in, what are those natural disasters that you deal with, right? You deal with wildfires, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, snowstorms, and just think about why we're going through this conversation in this webinar today is that think about the aspects of, are you prepared, right? Are you prepared for that wildfire from a housing standpoint? Is your program prepared? Is your residents prepared? You just sit and self-reflect as you go through this. If you pull anything away from today, is ask yourself the questions. Are you prepared? Are you prepared the best you can to make sure that your community is prepared? The follow-up question to that is your community prepared? Is your housing authority, when it comes to your housing tenants, are they prepared, right? And if the answer is no, or you're questioning, well, maybe we are, or I think so, you probably want to go back and visit when it comes to your preparedness, right? You want to go back and visit your residents, right? And a good way to do that is you can ask your residents, do they feel that you're prepared, right? Sometimes it's hard to hear the truth of what people see in our program, right? Doesn't mean everybody sees what they say is true, but sometimes what they see, they may not communicate it accurately to us, but there's something behind it that they're hitting that we can do better at. So as we go through today, from this presentation, from a natural disaster, a human-caused disaster, technology threat, ask yourself, are you prepared? Are you prepared? Go through all those exercises when it comes to the cyber attacks, the infrastructure, is your infrastructure failures, are you prepared to deal with that? Are you prepared to deal with the crisis while providing that high level of service that you give to your community every day, right? And I look at the fact of the analogy I always use through my career is that when we look at risk assessments and emergency all hazard preparedness, it's about your program being at a higher level, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing your job. As you do it great every day, you want to put yourself in a position to where when that crisis happens, you're doing your job and you're multiplying it by 1,000, and you're doing it at a high level, a faster level for a short period of time just to get through that crisis. So ask yourself these questions when it comes to your natural disasters, the technology threats, or even the public health emergencies, right? We all went through COVID several years ago, and that tested the resolve of all of us, right? And so we're all on guard right now of COVID. Well, before COVID, there was Ebola. and so we were on guard with Ebola when that was coming. It's something else is going to come down the pike. Are we ready for it, right? We may not have all the answers, but are we ready for it? And how we get ready for it is we create risk assessments, and we develop these risk assessments as we go. And these risk assessments, I will tell you, are from the standpoint you have your everyday work that you do, right? So these risk assessments have to be developed up and above your everyday work that you're doing every day for your community, right? So your jobs aren't easy. I recognize the fact that risk assessments take time. It takes you away from that everyday crisis that maybe your bosses are putting you through, maybe your political environment is putting you through, or even the community has that high expectations for you. And there's not enough hours in a day for you to deal with these issues. You have to force yourself to deal with these issues. You have to carve out that time and put that phone down and sit in the office, close the door to make sure that you're prepared for these threats. That's the only way this works. And we've all been in that position where we have to shut that phone down. And if we do a self-reflection when it comes to evaluating those top threats, and we evaluated ourselves, we could take 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day, and we can remove that getting on the phone, scrolling through Facebook or any of those social media apps or the newspaper on the phone, and put that phone down and focus on those risk assessments. So if you carve out 30 minutes a day and you just put yourself in a time frame and a mind frame that you can look at the threats, are you prepared? You take some notes, and then you put it aside. And the next day you revisit it, and you have your weekly meetings or your monthly meetings with individuals. You'll get to the point where risk assessments become part of your life. They become part of your everyday work when it comes to dealing with your communities and developing that framework that always evolves. It doesn't change. It always evolves once you have that framework. So build a good framework and then modify it where it needs to be modified so you can prepare your community to always be resilient and be safe. Let's talk a little bit about this acronym called THIRA, right? THIRA is the Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment. And basically what it is, it's a systematic process for identifying your community-specific threats, community-specific hazards, and determining what capability, targets, and resources require those to address that risk, right? So when you hear the word THIRA, everybody uses that instead of saying the whole word. And it's also called the SPR framework, right? The Stakeholder Preparedness Review. You can name this whatever you like, right? This is just the format the federal government uses, and it's in all the books when it comes to emergency preparedness. But I've heard communities name it different things, right? Stakeholder Preparedness Review, it's shorter. Community Preparedness Review, it works for the people who have to use it, right? And basically what it is, again, it's just a process systematically, and it gives you the opportunity to identify what those specific threats are in your community, right? Housing issues are different from community issues, right? So you deal with specific issues that in a rental environment than say in an environment that people own their homes. You may not have to deal with the people who own their homes. Your tribe may have to deal with issues that relate to schools, health issues, casino issues, business issues, right? Your specific area, you want to make sure you create a THIRA for housing, right? Give yourself that benefit to create a stakeholder-specific preparedness assessment that will give you a leg up when you deal with the community, right? There's a lot of legislative bases out there that you're required to do. I put a couple of them out there that will help you through this process to make sure that you're in line when it comes to federal reimbursement. That's important. With the Seminole Tribe, we used and we relied, because the hurricanes hit Florida a lot. We went direct to the federal government under the Stafford Act. We did the presidential and the major disaster declarations. We knew exactly what those legislative bases were when we looked at our THIRA and our framework, and we knew exactly what we needed to do when that crisis hit, which gave us that opportunity to get reimbursements sooner, get those resources that we needed to be boots on the ground during the storm, even before the storm. or during the event. So you want to make sure you understand what those legislative bases are. And then the operational values, right? You want to make sure you have a standardized methodology across the jurisdictions, right? You in housing aren't in a bubble. You can't work in a bubble. You have to make sure you're working with the other programs. Public safety should be at your hip. They should be a core partner to ensure that they can support your efforts when it comes to your housing needs, right? You want to make sure you can share those resources. And one of the things that I find out is that going around the country is a lot of tribes don't have mutual aids between programs. There's nothing wrong with you from a housing standpoint, a housing director working with the police chief or the fire chief and developing a mutual aid between each other. Even your schools, right? You may have an opportunity where housing, you can use the schools. If you have a school nearby, you can do an MOU or a mutual aid to where your residents, if they need a place to go, if you have, say, that flooding incident, you can have a pre-staged location like a school where you can have an MOU already drafted and you have that partnership developed. That's what you want to do during your risk assessment. You want to identify those threats, and then what are you going to do to minimize and mitigate that threat, right? The other part of this is you want to make sure you understand what the grant justifications are, what type of fundings that's out there. I also recognize right now things are going through a transition, but you want to stay on top of that transition because things do change, right? But you want to make sure you stay on top of that if a crisis does hit. Part of your framework is you need to understand where those financial components are out there. And by you staying on top of that and documenting that, keeping that part of your THIRA framework is going to be beneficial for you. So when we deep dive into the THIRA, we want to look at some of the components, right? The threat and the hazard piece, that's the natural, technology, the human caused source or disruptions that impact your housing environment, right? We want to look at the identification piece. That's the process of discovering and documenting the potential threats that are relevant to specific jurisdictions or organizations, right? So when 9/11 hit, one of the things that we did around the Seminole Tribe, we looked at the water plants, right? The water plants supply the water to the housing community. One of the big issues were the terrorists were looking at the potential of attacking the water system. Well, how do you do that? How do you work with the utilities department in the middle of a crisis so they understand that the safety and the security of that water plant is paramount to the success and the safety of the community. So we stepped it up just like the rest of the country did to where we went through with the utility department. We made sure that anytime they build some new constructions when it comes to the utility department, we were involved in doing those threat assessments to make sure it had cameras. We made sure we knew who the people were going in and out were. They had the water plant locked down and they had controlled access to where only the people that were supposed to go in there were the ones that are allowed to go in there because they work for utilities. They've already been vetted. We didn't need the community getting sick or somebody putting something in the water at the water plants that were going to endanger the community. So you want to identify issues like that can help your community and get in front of through this risk assessment, right? Risk assessments are basically their analysis that combines the threat and the likelihood of how vulnerable you are and what's those consequences that are going to impact your community. You want to prioritize the preparedness, right? And sometimes that preparedness requires you to partner with other programs in the tribe or even outside the tribe to make sure your community is safe, right? Stakeholder preparedness, it's so important to have your community prepared, right? Because when the crisis hits, everybody's on the phone, everybody wants answers, and that fear and that emotion hits. You don't want that fear and emotion hitting in the middle of the crisis because you're dealing with the crisis. You want people to be stable. You want them to have confidence in the work that you do and the work that your team does. So you want to make sure you prepare your community beforehand. And the last part of the component of the THIRA is just the review process, right? This review process is always a systematic approach. You want to make sure you're always looking at the gaps from what is current to what's going to be required in the future through your strategic planning, right? So if you don't have a strategic plan, it's highly recommended you have one, because the plans aren't one-off. A strategic plan does not exist by itself. All your plans from an all-hazard plan, and we'll touch on this a little bit as we go through the PowerPoint. The plans all work in junction with each other. So when you have these plans, it's important to understand what plan needs to be utilized and what role and really what purpose each plan is. And again, it can get overwhelming because there's a lot of plans, as you'll see on one of the slides. There's a lot of plans that you should have to help you mitigate these issues, right? So as we look at THIRA, it's one of those 6 steps processes that keep it simple, right? This is the KISS theory. You can use this as a template if you don't have a THIRA to help you. The step 1 is to identify the threat and the hazard, right? You want to sit down and develop a comprehensive list of threats that are going to impact your community or your organization based on what your experience is, your research, and your judgment, right? One of the things that sometimes we fail to do is recognize those subject matter experts that are in our programs. Sit with your staff. You'll find a lot of times your staff sees threats or hazards in their environment or in your program, and they just don't speak up, right? Give them the opportunity to provide that information to you to make your program better and make your community better, right? So that's step 1. You want to identify threats and hazards that are out there. The other part is you want to give the community the opportunity, right? One of the things I always told the police officers is that when you're on a 12-hour shift and you go home, for 12 hours, you're not there, right? Tribal members live in that community. They know that community. They know what's going on 24/7. You only know what's going on for 12 hours. And out of that 12 hours, you only know what's going on if somebody tells you or if you see it. Tribal members know what's going on in that reservation 24/7. So you want to make sure that you, as from a housing standpoint, your tenants know what's going on 24/7 in their environment. Give them the opportunity to share that information with you, and that can help identify some threats and hazards that you may be going through. The second step is give the context, right? You want to make sure that you describe the threats, and the hazards in the terms that might affect the community, right? Keep the words simple. Don't get into all these big words and all these different words that everyone wants to push down from different organizations. Make the terminology work for you. Give it to them in context so they understand what you're dealing with. They understand the timing, the location, and the conditions. Because if you're all on the same page and you're communicating with the same language, you're going to be in a better position to get through that crisis, right? Step 3 is to establish the capabilities of the target, right? So set specific measurable capability targets for each core capability identified within the national preparedness goals, right? So you want to make sure that you establish those capabilities and those targets. You want to then apply the results, use the capability targets to identify those resources that you need. Do you need pumps, because the road's flooded? Do you need water pumps? Do you want pumps there strategically placed because this area is going to flood, right? You want to look at these steps in chronological order as we're going through, so you can use this template again to help you just create that framework, right? You also want to, when you get done with your THIRA, before you finalize it, give it to the community. Let them look at reviewing your capabilities. Let them see that great work that you do. One of the things that I've learned through my career is that from a law enforcement standpoint, we could always do a better job communicating with the public to let them know how good we can do our job. And that's not tooting our own horn. It's letting them know really what we're capable of, right? It's not about bragging. It's about letting them know to build that trust and confidence in our capabilities. So you want to make sure you share that with the community. You want to let them know where your shortcomings are, right? Because they may see something that can just joggle a solution or even give you a solution that can help you mitigate these issues. And then finally, you want to make sure that you're prepared in your strategy. You want to develop strategies to address those gaps and always keep it fluid. You don't want to just create your THIRA and then put it on a shelf A lot of times that happens because we're so busy and we're dealing with these other issues. We want to make sure that we enhance the preparedness by keeping that always on our desk, keep it at the forefront, and always changing it and evolving it to make it better so the community is prepared. Again, as I stated earlier, you're not going to have the answer to everything. So when we look at identifying the threats, right, you want to be realistic. You want to find the balance, right? So some of the key activities you want to look at, you want to review the historical data and incidents and the events that took place in the past and see if it's reoccurring, right? If you go back 5 years or 10 years and see how they were reoccurring, see how each event was handled, see if you were consistent on how you responded to those different events. You want to bring in subject matter experts that can help you provide you that opportunity for a key evaluation, right? A lot of times, and I ran into this in my career, is that a lot of times, since we're doing the job every day, we're the experts, right? And that is true to a point, but we're not perfect. So sometimes we have to bite the bullet and we have to provide that opportunity, invite people in to give us that unvetted, honest outlook, right? They may not be 100% right, but some of the information could help us get better. And that's really what it's about, right? We just want to continue to get better every day. The work we did today, we want to do it better tomorrow. The work we do tomorrow, we want to do it better the next day. We want to analyze the geographics and the demographic factors, right? So we want to look at the type of roads that are being built. Are they changing, right? We want to look at where these new buildings are being put in. How's that impacting our flow and how we do our business every day? We want to look at the considering emerging threats that are taking place, right? Evaluating the neighborhood jurisdictional hazards, right? So when you have an environment that is always changing, there was a couple of reservations that, we had traffic was always changing because there was so much building going on. Right. So every day we were having traffic meetings on how the traffic was, how it was moving, what that MOT plan was. Sometimes you have to look at those areas and really put a lot of attention, but you can't forget about everything else. You have to make sure you find that balance, right? So you also want to look at, when we look at identifying threats and hazards, it's the selection criteria, the probability of occurrence, right? Sometimes somebody in staff will come up with an idea and that the idea is not going to happen. That event is so far away that it's not going to happen, right? So you want to be realistic when you look at identifying those criteria. What's going to be the potential impact, right? A Hurricane 1 is different from a Hurricane 5. You take them both serious, but they're different levels of response. So you want to make sure you look at the severity, because a Hurricane 5 is going to be different from a Hurricane 1. However, there's a lot of components that are similar, but you're going to respond a little bit different just because of the nature of the 1 versus the 5, right? The warning time, right? Some events require you not to have any warning at all, right? A tornado pops up in the Midwest. You may not have just but a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds to get to where you need to be, right? A hurricane, you can see that coming, right? You're being told that this is going to come. A wildfire, same thing. So you want to look at the warning time, and then you want to look at the duration of the impact. How long is that going to impact us? How long is power going to be out once that tornado goes through? How long is power going to be out once the snowstorm or the blizzard hits us, right? And then how does that affect our tenants? How are they going to live? How are they going to survive? How are they going to stay safe? So the identification process should be thorough, but it should be focused and be realistic, right? You want to make sure it's comprehensive. You want to make sure it prioritizes the threats that your community is going to be challenged with. And you want to make sure that you find key solutions that are going to be realistic to the scenario that's going to impact you, right? So we want to give it some context, right? So when we look at giving it some context, we want to make sure that it's detailed. When we look at the hazard, is it really going to impact us, and how's it going to impact us? Again, keep it simple when it comes to your terminology, right? What's the magnitude? Where's it going to hit? What time of day and what time of season it's going to happen? Those are the things you want to talk about, right? So when we look at hurricanes, for example, a lot of times hurricane season just started June 1st. A lot of times in Florida, the hurricanes usually start in the Atlantic. As hurricane season moves across the year and it goes to November 30th, a lot of the hurricanes come from the south or comes from the Gulf of Mexico / Gulf of America, right? So we want to make sure that we're realistic. So a lot of times, you know, you'll get a call from a resident that lives on the west coast of Florida that is panicking over a hurricane that's going to impact southeast Florida, right? So you want to be realistic when you deal with the community. You want to be realistic. You want to be informed. You want to keep them informed, but you want to be realistic where you don't create undue stress for yourself or undue stress for the community. Keep it in context so the situation can be measured. Keep it in context so your response is measured, but you're also taking care of any challenges that come up within your community. Step 3 would be establish the capability targets. You know, you want to define the success matrix, you know, create specific measurable statements that are required performance for each core capability under the worst possible solutions, right? You want to consider the impacts. You want to see who's involved, right? A lot of times the elders or people with medical conditions, those are the ones you want to focus on first, and then you create that structure down from there, right? You want to align those core capabilities to make sure that they fit your mission, right? And those 5 missions under those 32 core capabilities are prevention, the protective measures, the mitigation, the response, and recovery, right? So if you keep everything within context of that, and those 5 key mission areas, the 32 core capabilities that fall underneath them are going to work to your advantage. So when we look at examples of the core capabilities and those core capability targets, for instance, say a mass care service event that happens in your community, right? So the threat would be food. So if you have a mass care service event, the threat is going to be, okay, where do we get food to cater to all these people? So the capability target is going to say something like within 12 hours, we want to respond to this incident and prepare 2,500 residents and get them in an area where we can provide them with access and to be have functionality within the environment, feed them, make sure they have a place to stay, they're comfortable until we can get through the event. A cybersecurity event, again, it's going to be the threat or the hazard is going to be the cyber attack. And the goal is to have within 4 hours, we want to detect within that 4-hour time frame, we want to detect what the issue is. We want to isolate the issue from the system. We want to get the backup system working, and we want to maintain the core functionalities of our critical infrastructure so the tribe can continue to operate. When we look at a public health event, we just went through it as a pandemic. We all lived it, right? We want to distribute those countermeasures that help the community, right? So in this particular example, 70% of the population within 48 hours, we want to make sure that they receive some of the supplies that are sent to us through the stockpile, right? In COVID, it was masks, right? It was either masks or the shots. You know, you wanted to make sure that the community had what they need. So through your THIRA, one of the capability targets when you look at a pandemic is write it out so you can see here's the pandemic. Within 72 or 48 hours, we want to make sure we have X, Y, and Z done. Another one would be a wildfire. Again, deliver those actionable information to emergency responders, get the information out to the public within 30 minutes of the first 12 hours, right? So you want to make sure that you are timely on your messaging and you want to write it down before the crisis hits. So through your THIRA and your all hazard preparedness, you want to make sure this information framework, right? It may not be to a T when it happens, but you have a framework that you can work off of, right? So you could say within 30 minutes, but you may get it done within 15 minutes, or you may get it done within 45 minutes. And that's all based on the number of personnel you have and the circumstances that you're going through. Step 4 would be you want to apply the results, right? The resource requirements. A lot of times we don't know what personnel we have. We don't know if the personnel is impacted by the event that's taken place. For example, during one of the hurricanes, the people that were supposed to handle all the shelters, nobody showed up at the shelter. Why was that? Because all their families were impacted. Their houses were impacted. They couldn't get to the shelter to come in to take care of the tribe. So we had to divert resources from public safety and other tribal programs to go work in the shelter. How did they do that? We had the all hazard plan where we were able to give them a quick training before the shelter opens. We were able to give them a quick training so they understood, they had the framework on how to deal with the shelter and to assist the community, right? It's all hands on deck. We want to make sure that we identify those resources that are required. Partner capabilities, another one. We want to determine what those resources are. We want to determine ahead of time what we need to do. One of the areas that we identified in one of the storms is we didn't have enough low body trucks that could transport heavy equipment. So we had to make sure we had a strategic plan. We partnered with Buildings and Grounds who had a low boy truck. We partnered with Utilities who had a low boy truck, and then Wildland had a low boy truck. So that we knew these low boy trucks could move backhoes, tractors, any equipment, that heavy equipment that we needed to move. So we were able to strategize with those programs, partner with them, and use those resources that may not have been public safety resources, but they were other programs. So you want to do that for housing. You want to make sure that you identify those areas that you can apply during the crisis, not do it while the crisis is happening, right? So you want to plan all this out before that crisis takes place. Gap analysis, another big piece that you always want to continue to look at where the shortcomings are, right? Again, I use the analogy where we had people not showing up at the shelter. How we saw that is we saw that the shelter there was no movement there. So we started to ask questions. Where are the people that are supposed to work in the shelter? Well, the program that was over the shelter, they just assumed that somebody was at the shelter. Well, the reality is there was a gap there. There was no plan to identify if somebody doesn't come in by a certain time, how do we know what we're supposed to do? So gap analysis, we want to make sure we identify any shortcomings, and then again, prioritize. We want to make sure we prioritize everything we do that is going to rank from the thing we should do most to the thing that we should do least. It's all important, but you can't do everything at the same time because you don't have the resources. You may not have the funding to do it. So you have to prioritize those results and prioritize those resources to put you in the best position to take care of your community. Again, stakeholder review. This is so important when I think about my previous career and I look back on the community involvement. We were successful because we had the community's input. And a lot of times when we weren't successful was because the community input was lacking. So you want to make sure that you give the opportunity to have that partnership and partnership engagement. You want to look at allowing them to see your performance, allowing them to see really what your capabilities are so they have that confidence and that trust in what you can do. You want to make sure you document everything you're doing, right? And I know people don't like to document, especially with computers now and AI. Everybody's trying to figure out that easy way of doing things. There's no easy way around this. It's sitting down, documenting, making sure that you're contributing the true facts, the true assessment to what is going on, because at the end of the day, AI isn't going to be able to take care of your community. The lack of work ethic isn't going to be able to take care of your community. The true work ethic, working in partnership, is going to take care of the community, and you're going to be able to do that through some of the trends that you can use and you can identify as you do your risk assessment. And finally, you want to make sure that you have a preparedness strategy. Again, when you look at documentation, FEMA, when they come in, they're going to support you. They're going to ask for all this documentation, right? And you want to be able to give them to them like a gold platter. Just turn it right over to them. Say, hey, we're prepared. We know what we're doing. We just need your support. FEMA's not going to come in and do it for you, or any organization is not going to come and do it for you. You're always going to be, and you always want to be, that lead organization that takes care of the community. It's your community. It's your housing authority. It's your residents. It's your tenants. As far as my view and my career is that I want to be able to come in and support you, and you continue to take that lead. You want to develop strategies, create the approach when it comes to addressing those gaps, and timelines, right? We want to look at timelines, and the hardest thing is trying to figure out, okay, how long is this going to take, right? That's why this framework is an evolving document, and it's evolving document because we don't have the answer to everything. So you may say, hey, for the next 3 hours, we're going to do this. Well, it may take 6 hours, but from a framework standpoint, you put 3 hours down because that's what you thought. Now, the next time that occurs, you can be more realistic, right? So we build on every event and every milestone to make sure our work product is at the highest level. So just understand you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall short in some areas. That's okay to do that, right? But you want to make sure that you communicate that. You don't want to come out and say I'm a failure, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is let people know that, okay, we have a 3 hour window here, but if it takes us a little longer, that's okay. We'll adjust, right? Let people know realistically what your expectations are. And again, allocating resources from manpower to equipment is something that from a risk assessment, you can identify that. You can get everybody prepared beforehand so everybody knows what the plan is. This is just an example of a tornado impact. As I go through the kind of like a tabletop exercise here with this slide, an E4 tornado strikes a tribal reservation during the early evening hours in the spring, affecting a 2-mile wild path across 15 miles of the tribal land. The tornado damages critical infrastructures, including your health department, elder housing complex, and the water treatment facility, right? Then you look at the capabilities of the target exam. I'm sorry, let's go over to the current capability assessment. You look at after the tornado hits, the clinic staff, they can only handle 25 injured people with the current resources they have, because you've done that risk assessment up front. So 25 people is the max that they can handle. They don't have the ability for critical care on the reservation. Mutual aid agreements with the county hospitals require a 45-minute transport. Emergency power is only limited for 8 hours to the clinic, right? The clinic's been damaged, the infrastructure's there, and now you only have 8 hours for the clinic to stay up and running, right? So within 12 hours, your capability target example would be within 12 hours of the tornado impacting, you want to provide medical care to up to 75% of 75 injured individuals, including 15 that require critical care, while maintaining essential health services to the community. That's your capability target example, right? During this particular event, right? How do you get there? Those strategies that you want to develop, you want to enhance the clinic's surge capacity through additional training, right? So that they can only handle 25 injured people, right? So you want to look at, okay, how can we enhance that? How can we make it better so when an event like a tornado E4 comes, how can we enhance that training? You want to look at establishing telemedicine capabilities, for example, from a remote critical care support, right? There may be a jurisdiction down the way that you can utilize telemedicine that could help not the critical injured, but just the people that are injured that maybe don't need to be transported, and you can do telehealth. You want to upgrade the emergency power system to 72 hours. You may want to get with the power company and see what they can do. I also recognize some tribal lands are in an environment where, power is just it's a privilege to have it because of the environment they're in. Some of the tribal reservations that are in the city, work with your power companies to develop a core strengthening to where when something happens, you become a priority to get power up and running, your public safety, your health and your BIA clinics. Those are areas where the power company, you can work with them, create an MOU, and they'll become priority. So they'll turn those areas on before they turn just a regular housing community on, right? So if you have a elder housing community that needs housing, they may be able to partner with you to turn that elder housing community on prior to turning on a regular community that maybe doesn't have an elderly population, right? The other part is you want to pre-position medical supplies at community centers. During hurricanes, we do medical preparedness and water, ice. We stockpile in different areas. So if a hurricane is going to hit the East Coast, we stockpile all our water, our food, our ice, and our manpower. We stockpile it either North Florida, West Florida, somewhere out of the way of the hurricane. So once the hurricane hits, all those resources are coming to the impacted areas. So you want to look at that strategic development beforehand, have that in place. I will tell you from a housing standpoint, Seminole Tribe of Florida Housing Department, they've learned from the past. They've learned from events, and now they have a really good core system that is always improving, but it's so strong to where they have propane that is on standby waiting to come in after the storm comes. So the generators that are on their housing buildings have diesel or propane coming in. So they've pre-positioned propane with propane companies. So when the storm comes through, those things they used to have to fight for, they no longer have to fight for, because they took the strategy through their THIRA and their risk assessment, and they developed a plan knowing that they were going to need propane and diesel. They developed a plan. They worked with private companies to stage when a hurricane is 5 days out. There's communication already happening with the propane and the diesel companies to bring them the fuel in to make sure the housing environment has power, right? If power goes out, and the elderly housing communities, they have power. So they've done a tremendous job, and I've watched that grow to where it is today, and I contribute that to them just really committing themselves to having a THIRA program and continue to do risk assessments throughout all the reservations. I talked a little bit earlier about all these policies that are out there and all these different plans that you want to have. It's a lot. There's a lot of words. There's a lot of pages in these, but they all run together. Some of it's a little repetitive, but there's redundancy in that for a reason, right? So some of the plans that you want to have that kind of go together and they combine together from a comprehensive emergency management plan. You want to make sure the tribe has a comprehensive emergency management plan. There's nothing wrong with you in housing having a comprehensive emergency management plan for housing. The Seminole Tribe, we created what we call all hazard plans. Every program, every 72 programs throughout the tribe has an all hazard plan that basically is a how-to framework. It's always evolving. Every year it's being updated. Every event that takes place, it's being reviewed. And then it's put into the new updated version is being put into the comprehensive emergency management plan or the COOP plan to make sure everybody is on the same page. And everybody has access. The preschool has access to the public safety plans. Public safety has access to the school plans. School has access to the elder affairs, the recreation, the cultural department. Everybody has access to everybody's plans, so they understand and they can communicate with each other, and they have a quick resource that they can go to on the intranet. So it's something that when you look at these plans, it's a lot, right? So when you just look at this slide, all these four capabilities from a comprehensive emergency management plan to the core planning documents, which is your operational procedures, your all hazard mitigation plan, the assessment process, which we're talking about today when it comes to risk assessments, the THIRAs, and then you look at the operational procedures, right? Your regular SOPs that you deal with every day, your job aids, your job descriptions, right? When you write a job description, you're not putting in there, how do you deal with a tornado in a job description? That kind of falls under, you'll do whatever the boss tells you to do, or the emergency operations for the tribe. You have these checklists that are required. You have the FEMA paperwork that's required. So you have all this documentation that you need to be successful. And it's a lot, and it could overtake people. And a lot of people don't like to read all this information, right? So you want to kind of condense it down, write the whole plan so it's supposed to be written, and then have cheat sheets so people can use as a quick reference guide. So it's a lot of work. And as I said earlier, the work you do in housing is very admirable, and you have your everyday work that you have to do. But all these plans have to be done for really to prepare yourself, right? And if you don't have them, it's an opportunity. You have an opportunity to jumpstart yourself in your program to where you can start chipping away at getting these plans developed within your organization. Again, the emergency operation plan, it goes hand in hand with the THIRA, right? How's the THIRA informed in the emergency operation plan, right? Hazard-specific annexes based on identifying the threats. Your resource requirements are informed through your capability of targets. Roles and responsibilities are aligned within the capability assessments, and activation triggers are derived from the threat of the context, right? So when you implement that process, the THIRA results directly to your emergency operation, right? So it goes hand in hand. It's like putting a hand in a glove. You can't have one without the other. So when you revise your emergency operation plan and you begin by reviewing your THIRA to align your threat assessments and your capability levels, that's going to impact your emergency operation plan. So it's something you want to just keep in mind. If you change one plan, just remember the other plans are going to end up changing because of the detailed, and they work hand in hand. It's not just a one-off with one plan. All the plans are kind of mitigated together, and they lean on each other to develop support for your operation. The COOP plan, the continuity of operation plan, again, this is a plan that's essential for every function throughout your tribe. It looks at the THIRA, the vulnerability assessments, the resource planning, and then testing scenarios. Scenarios are great when it comes to these plans. We would hold trainings with all our plans, with all the programs, go around, do individual trainings with all the programs, and then bring everybody together to do the tabletop exercise with all the plans to see who knew what, where those weaknesses were, and what we needed to do to build those people up and give them the opportunity. Because as the year goes on, people forget about the plans, and it's something that it's important. These got to stay at the forefront of everything you do. Keep them on your desk if you're a supervisor on the call. Sit down when you have meetings, talk about it. Keep it at the forefront of everybody. When you're going through risk assessments and you're having the discussions throughout the year, talk about all these plans, even if for 15, 20 minutes, make sure it's at the forefront of everything you do. I put this in there because I think housing has a nexus to your Indian Health Services. You have elder community, you have disabled communities that live in your housing authorities. You want to make sure you know what your IHS capabilities are within your reservation, right? So I would imagine that each one of your clinics has a community health needs assessment that they do, and the capabilities. You want to ask for that. You want to talk to your health people, ask them what they're capable of doing. Let them share those documents with you. Our health plan was shared throughout the entire tribe. It was given to the community, so everybody knew the capabilities. When something happened, they knew the capabilities of the community. The reality is they should be hand in hand, just like public safety. Your health people should be hand in hand with you from a housing standpoint, because unlike every community out in the country, on the reservation, your tribal members visit that local IHS or the tribal clinic, and so they know the population. So what a benefit it has to have the doctors and the nurses working with you in tribal housing when an event or a critical incident happens, that confidence there to where you have the health component right there to help your tenants to be safe, to be healthy. And when they see that support is there and you're working together with your not just your medical health, but also your psychological, your family services, your clinical behavioral professionals right there working through that trauma, gives that community the opportunity to have trust and confidence in your ability. And as a housing authority, you have that you have the opportunity really to drive this plan to make sure all those resources are supporting your mission. One of the other areas through your THIRA I just want to mention is the technology. You know, the GIS system is something that I don't think we use enough of. I know through my career, I wish I would have used it a little bit more. GIS is something, there's a company called Ezra GIS to tribal communities. They have a program through BIA where you're able to have your own GIS system through BIA. So if you don't have a GIS system, and what that does, you can map out all your residents. You can map out all your roads, your exits, your entrances to all your communities. You could put all your residents on this map. So you have everything at your fingertips to where it shows the weather, it shows critical events that are going on, and you can even have the portal to where your community sees it as well. So if you don't have Ezra GIS, let me know. I have some contacts that I can provide the information to you, and you can get it through your tribe. So if you don't have Ezra GIS, it's an opportunity for you just to, again, enhance your ability to prepare for those threat and hazards that are going to impact your housing, and it's at your fingertips. This is a program that I will tell you is so dynamic, and you can use it to really work to your advantage when it comes to your threats and hazards that are on your reservation. It's an opportunity really to prepare your community at the next level to make sure that they're safe. When we look at data resources, again, I talked a little bit about how we deal with data. There's federal resources that are out there. If you don't have in your tribe the component, a component that deals with the weather service, talk to your emergency manager and get in connection with your local weather service. They will give you briefings. They will give you exact information, how that weather is going to be impacted in your environment. They'll tell you everything down to the percentage of flooding and how the wind speed's going to be. So those are resources you want to make sure that you have at your fingertips. From a housing standpoint, I recognize you're only one program, but you can use your emergency manager in the tribe. You actually can, if you don't have this resource, get with your emergency manager and ask them to have that relationship with the National Weather Service. Great resource to have that can get you through certain environments that impact your community. You could look at your historical data when it comes to identifying hazards. Really, what impacted your community in the past? What are those areas that you can learn from, and how was it dealt with? How did your predecessor handle it, right? So we can always learn from the past. We can always go back and self-reflect to make the future look better for us. Again, there's academic research. A lot of universities, and I understand the sovereignty piece with the tribe, a lot of universities have a research component that can help your organization, help develop research for you within your community that can benefit how you respond. So there's the academic piece. And then, of course, you have the industry resource. You have a lot of tribal-owned businesses, insurance companies that are just waiting to assist any way they can. I know with Seminole Tribe, we brought the insurance company in, and they sat with us at the table, in a non-threatening environment, and we kind of went through all these scenarios and asked them, how are you going to deal with this? What do the rental communities need if this was going to impact the rental community? If flooding was there, a tornado came in, a wildfire, what do you do from an insurance standpoint? Bring them to the table and force them to give you the information to make your community safe and healthy. One of the other areas that you can look at is you have the ability to do quantitative and qualitative studies. These are opportunities that really, from a qualitative standpoint, you can do interviews. And that's, to me, there's nothing better than just having conversations with people, asking them their opinion, getting feedback from them, running through scenarios with them, and just highlighting the smarts that all of us have, right? Sometimes we have to pull information out of people. You have the opportunity to do qualitative methods that you can interview people. You can sit down with a whole litany of programs, your community, the individuals or the subject matter experts in some areas and just ask them questions, pick their brain. You have that opportunity to use that information to help build your risk assessment. You can also do quantitative studies, which are surveys. You send anonymous surveys out to programs. Just don't do your residents, do the programs you work with, right? Develop surveys. There's SurveyMonkey that's out there. There's Quatrix. That's, I prefer Quatrix when it comes to surveys. SurveyMonkey is good. Really what works for you, what you're capable of when it comes to the surveys, because not everybody likes to do surveys. So there's a process to it. So you want to make sure that you maximize that process, collect the data that can help you develop a really good core risk assessment, identify those strengths. When it comes to when you interview somebody, there's certain things that you can gain when it comes to the strengths on interviews. Other strengths can be done through anonymous surveys. A lot of people may not want to speak to you in person. They would prefer to be anonymous and give you that information through the anonymous survey. So it's an opportunity for you. You can use these two methods to help you build on your organization to make yourselves better, right? Another activity, top hazards identification. For the sake of time, I'm going to speed up here a little bit so I can hit all the slides. Probability assessments. You have the ability to impact evaluations and prioritization, right? So you want to look at these three areas when it comes to considering the overall big picture of your all hazard plan. These are the top hazards and the top identifying areas that you can look at that can help you become better when it comes to risk assessments. You want to understand the key risks that's in your community, right? What level is it at? Is it at medium, low, high? The hazard, is it a source that's going to harm your whole community? What type of harm is it coming to the community? Does the hazard exist independently, or is it going to be interactive because you have a wildfire and then people they're not going to leave their home? So now you have people that become a hazard because they don't want to leave their home. We had a circumstance where in the Everglades there was a wildfire that was out of control. And through that process, we had people who didn't want to leave their home. And if they would have stayed in their home, that fire would have caught their home on fire. So we had to go down and send the right people down to communicate with the residents to get them to evacuate, right? So sometimes you have to mitigate those circumstances and you have to understand what that risk is and what you need to do to get them through that risk, right? So, and that means sometimes you have to take personnel that traditionally wouldn't do what they do on an average day, and you put them in a position to be effective in the community. So we knew that these people didn't want to leave. We sent a group down there. They were resistant, politely resistant. So we knew that, okay, let's send people down they're familiar with, they have the better relationship. And we sent those individuals down, and lo and behold, they were able to convince just through that trust and relationship that they left. They ended up leaving their house, and thankfully their house didn't burn down, but they were thankful they got out because it got right up to their house. So sometimes you got to identify what type of risk, what level it's at, and then what position you're taking. Some of the vulnerability indicators, again, you got the physical vulnerabilities, your infrastructure, age and condition of your houses. Are they up to building codes? Is the critical system redundancy? Do you have redundancy within your housing authority, right? Again, geographical locations is very important. Are they in a flood area, right? Systematic vulnerabilities are your supply chain. When COVID hit, everybody was fighting over masks. Who was going to get the mask first and how many masks were you going to get, right? The federal government was shipping out masks. We were talking to mask suppliers, and they can only send a certain amount of masks to us, right? We didn't have enough masks to go out through the whole community. How do we deal with that? We're vulnerable when it comes to the population. So we gave all the masks. We started with the elders and the children first, and then we went to the adults, right? So you want to look at the systematic vulnerabilities, social vulnerabilities. Again, we talked about the internet and how much we all depend on just that social interaction, the demographics, the health disparities, Language, you have elders that don't speak English or a certain language, and there's the language barrier. So that's something you have to take into account. Again, organizational vulnerabilities. We looked at one of our EOCs for housing wasn't up to code, so we had to remove all the housing people out of a structure because their program structure wasn't up to where it needed to be. So we had to remove them. They were displaced, put in a different location, and then they had to learn how to work in that new location. So it created gaps because all their information was at their office. So we had to basically take their office and move them to another structure so they can be successful. So you want to look at ahead of time, you want to look and see where those vulnerability areas are and what those indicators are. When we look at the impact of estimation, you want to look at what comes first, right? Life safety is always going to come first. You want to make sure everybody's safe. Buildings can be destroyed. Lives can't be, redone, right? So you want to make sure life safety comes in, and that's what you prioritize everything around. Communicate that life safety is always going to be the first to make sure everybody is taken care of. You minimize the injuries that are to individuals, right? Property damage, operational continuity, and financial impact. Those are areas you want to make sure that you look at when you do your estimations. This is just a graph that you can make, for you. I just put a graph together to show that here's priority, right? This reservation, wildlife or wildfires are a priority over civil disturbances. Will civil disturbances happen? Of course. Will drought happen? Of course. But the main issue that this reservation is going to impact is wildfire and cyber attacks. So this is the priority list that we're going to go through. We're going to deal with wildfires, cyber attacks, flood. We're going to put a little bit more attention in wildfire, cyber attack than we would civil disturbance. However, civil disturbance, we're going to still pay attention to it. So again, you want to find that balance when you look at risk assessments. Some of the mitigation strategies, again, structural, policy-based, education, and resource-based. These are the mitigation strategies that can help you develop your plan. Again, this is just a template that you can look at through as you go through this PowerPoint. You have hazards, the description of the hazard, the specific threat being addressed. Example, flash floods in the downtown area, right? So you want to make sure that you have a graph that works for you, works for your community, easy to read, that people can look at and make sound judgment and decisions to better your community. Skip over that one. Again, today on this PowerPoint, we focused on all hazards approach, systematic process, plan integration, and a balanced method. 90 minutes is just a high level piece of risk assessments that we all need to be aware of. We need to have them within our community. We need to have them within our policy. And it's something that is important to make sure the community is successful. Some of the recommended resources, again, FEMA is going through some transition right now. However, there is some laws in place and policies in place that you can take away that can help you through your process and help you through your THIRA to make sure that you're taken care of. So there's a lot of templates out there that you can use from the federal government that you can, I always call Seminole friendly, right? So whatever tribe it is, make it friendly for you. Don't just cookie cutter it. Make sure it works for your tribe. So we want to look at a knowledge check. Which hazards surprised you? You want to look at when you're sitting around just drinking coffee, right? Think about these questions that you can ask yourself from a knowledge check to see where you're prepared, right? We're the subject matter experts in the field, and we're paid as supervisors and leaders to develop these plans. We can't just put them aside. So you want to do knowledge checks to make sure and be honest with yourself. Make sure you're prepared, because if you're not prepared, your community is not going to be prepared. And the reality is we're here for the community. We're here to make sure that they're prepared. Here's some questions that key questions that we usually get asked when we do presentations that I put in the presentation that you can look at. Again, next steps, what I would tell you is, look at the resources you have in today's material. determine if you have a risk assessment in place. If you don't, the good part about this is you can start one. You can start one, and every day you can just add to it. It's not going to happen overnight, but it gives you the opportunity to get something in place. My contact information is here. Feel free to email me the information or any questions that you have. My cell phone number, this is a direct line to me. You can call me. If I don't answer, please leave a message, or you can text me, and I'll follow back up with you. I'm here to help out, whatever I can do to make your life easier, even if it's just soundboarding. You want to call me on something, feel free to give me a call, and I'll guide you as best I can. Again, if you want the GIS information, send me an email or a text or call me, and I'll provide that GIS information to you. Thank you for your time. I know when I went 5 minutes over, Jasmine, I apologize for that. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. The first of 4, I look forward to the next 3 tomorrow and Thursday and Friday. And I hope you can join us. If not, I know the Native Learning Center does a great job making sure you have access to the material, and we appreciate their partnership. So thank you for the opportunity today. Jasmine, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Will, for your time and effort with the presentation. I know I certainly learned a lot. As we close out this webinar, feel free to submit any questions or comments that you have for Will in the chat. This is the best time. If you feel like your question is a little bit too private, you can always reach out to Will in an email or call him. I'm sure he's happy to help. So please take a moment to complete our survey about today's webinar that I just linked for you in the chat. It only takes a minute or so, and your feedback really helps us do more of what we're working well to improve upon in areas that may need it. We invite you to be as candid as you like. The survey is completely anonymous. And we hope that you can join us for our next webinar. It's going to be All Hazards Preparedness and Partnerships Day 2, again with Will. It's going to be around the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And depending on where you are, the time may vary. And feel free to access this and any other webinar recordings at our New Cathedral webinar archive, now posted on our YouTube channel. Feel free to view them and share them with your colleagues and friends. And please also check out our upcoming events posted in our various social medias. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We also have an in-house produced podcast titled The Hope of Being a Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within Native American housing and self-determination. You can also listen on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, as well as viewing our video recordings with our guests on YouTube. Once again, I want to thank all our participants for joining us today. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we hope to connect with you real soon. All right, hope to see you guys tomorrow. Thank you, Will. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
You too.